weird seeing one for real. You work any time amongst the ratings and you get used to hearing about the bendies, but seeing one for real. We all know the stories of strange creatures living in the gaps between decks. Little knock-knock noises in the night. It's like a joke. If something goes missing, hey, the bendy's got it. Some poor bastard never shows up for loading duty. No mystery, the bendy's got him. Only no one really believes it. One late shift I'm loading in the gen room, when right in front of me it stepped out of the smoke like a ghost. Cloaked and hunched, hands bent back on themselves. It shimmered like it was messing with me brain, trying to convince me it weren't there. It didn't fool me. I gave it a smash round the ear with me shovel and it went down like a sack of sand. Before I know it, there's all these big lads with guns chucking nets on the beast, shouting blue murder. Great, I thought. Someone's caught a bendy, and I helped. There'll be a reward in this. Except I've been locked up in here ever since, and no one's bothered to tell me why. And now I got the likes of you asking questions. I don't mean to seem impertinent, sir. What's so bloody Greetings friends and welcome to the Liber Xenologis. I'm Lorcan and this is OnlyWar. In this entry we're going to look at one of the most mysterious races to be found in all the galaxy. A complete enigma to most Imperial scholars. And while various xenologists have tried to decipher the various reports and tall tales of their existence, they remain as much a mystery today as they were when they were first encountered back in the Great Crusade era. They are the Hrud, Troglodyteum Hrudi, and despite their long history in the universe, they remain something of an enigma. In this entry in the Liber Xenologis, we look at what we know of their origins, physiology, behavior, and technology. We will piece together knowledge from their encounters with the servants of the Imperium, from those who turned from the light of the Emperor millennia ago, and those more recent, where the touch of madness has led to the path of heresy in the eyes of some branches of the Inquisition. Our discussion will take in some of the contradictions and beliefs of the past, but when dealing with a species where the agents of the Imperium have always been especially keen to suppress the knowledge of their existence from the greater citizenry, we would do well not to fall into speculation. Thank you to the channel Patreons, and those of you who have used the tip jar and affiliate links in the description. Every dollar helps support the channel grow and is greatly appreciated. The Hrud are believed to be an ancient race. In fact, there is strong evidence to be made that they are one of the races either created by or modified by the Old Ones, back before the galaxy-wide cataclysmic war with the Catan and their enslaved Necrontyr allies, the War in Heaven. The Hrud are fastidious record keepers, and it is documented in various accounts of interactions with them that they keep vast stores of historical, cultural, and technical information within library chambers located in their Juntak, the warren-like subterranean tunnel cities which the Hrud create on the worlds they colonize and dominate. Much of our knowledge of the Hrud belief system that hints at their early origin comes from the correspondence of Inquisitor Real Breaz, who encountered a human thrall taken by the Hrud at 6 years of age, and passed on his findings before he himself was judged excommunicat traitoris and a xenophile. The deranged man was found in the Hrud tunnels beneath the hive city of Agavara, having been raised as a Zanhad, a kind of slave cum pet of the Hrud, for the remainder of his life. As part of his stilted testimonies during his interrogation, the man recounted how each tribe of Hrud carried with them amassed knowledge of the mass tribe, known as the Rahid. Despite being both tribal in nature and prone to splintering and migration, it would appear the knowledge of this greater collective of the Hrud race is always embedded within each new tribe as it is formed, and carried forward as it migrates. His account detailed the Hrud as having formidable recall and the ability to recount extensively the wanderings of their forebears, holding particularly dear their ancestral family ties. In the opinion of Inquisitor Breaz, the nature and clarity of the Hrud mass memory makes their accounts of their deities and origins at least likely to be based in some form of historical fact, or at least related very closely to real events, rather than the purely spiritual superstition of other races. The Hrud believe that in the dawn of time they were created by a pantheon of benevolent gods, known as the Salahai, or Most Ancient, who intended them to bask in the sun and be fruitful. This all changed when their deities entered a ruinous war with beings known as the Yam-Ko, or Mirror Devils, and were forced to flee. According to the Hrud, only a single god of their pantheon remained, Qua, he who lingers. Recognizing the danger his beloved creations were in without the protection of their deities, Qua transformed the Hrud into the nocturnal, subterranean species they are today. It is then said that 500,000 years ago, Qua disappeared, informing the Hrud that he had great works to attend, and they would be reunited at the time of Rahid Skol, when the tribes would reunite for the last battle against the Yom-Ko. It is not a massive leap to associate the description of the benevolent Shalhai with the Old Ones, and the Yom-Ko as either the Catan or possibly the Necrons from the War in Heaven. There is also the description of glyphs and pictograms inscribed on the walls of a Hrud warren, as described by Inquisitor Matarin Raleigh, that appear to describe the Hrud pantheon in greater detail. He made the connection between the representation shown there of a horned hunter, a red-handed figure, a laughing jester, and a hammer-wielding artisan, with the ancient gods of the Eldari pantheon, being Kurnos, god of the hunt, Kaela Mensa Cain, god of war, Chegorath, the laughing god, and Vol, god of forges. Some have claimed this could be evidence of a shared ancestry between the species. However, it is also possible that the Old Ones used similar representations for aspects of life that would be important to the races they created with more than one species, tailoring their appearance and legends to each one, but keeping the same broad themes, although further discussion of these potential theories does not belong in this entry of the Liber Xenologis. What is also interesting is the description of Qua and the meaning of the name of that deity, and its link to another future entry in the Liber Xenologist, the organisms known as the Umbra. In the dissection report of Magus biologist Charles Darvas, an Umbra specimen was euthanized via photoexposure from an antigrammetic illuminator drones when gaseous means had no effect. On its death, those present felt a phenomenon including intense cranial pain and the projection of images, including a humanoid figure splintering apart, a turbulent warp storm, deep space, and a single word, linger. Although again, this is not the place to discuss the link between the stories from the birth of Slanesh and the hunting of the remaining Old One through the webway, that entity being broken and shattered to linger forever. It would certainly fit with the Hrud religious belief, and could explain what eventually happened to Qua and the possible link to the Umbra. The exact physiology of the Hrud can be difficult to ascertain. Some accounts are from unreliable sources, and the Imperium seems particularly keen to suppress knowledge of the species. It is also noted that in some cases, the body of a newly deceased Hrud undergoes rapid and extreme decomposition, including liquefaction of the upper dermis layers and musculature. The most complete account comes from the dissection report of a female Hrud by Magus biologist Charles Darvas, having euthanized a specimen by asphyxia using cyanide. He found the Hrud to have an endoskeleton composed of a semi-silica resin, with evidence of further silicon compounds throughout the skeletal structure. The skull was roughly analogous with that of humans, with a compact singular nasal cavity indicating poor scent detection, but sophisticated oral canals and inner ear structures suggesting superior hearing and balance. There are mandible structures present at the corners of the mouth, and in accounts of living Hrud, large facial pores are present that secrete a thick mucus. The two black ocular organs are larger than human eyes and contain no cone photoreceptors, although large concentrations of rod photoreceptor stacks were found on the retina. indicating poor perception of colour, but extreme sensitivity and excellent vision in low light conditions, all findings supporting a species that evolved or was created for a nocturnal or subterranean existence. Their remaining endoskeletal structure bears little resemblance to humanity, outside of a central spinal column made of vertebrae that allow complete freedom of movement, but can be interlocked through muscular contraction to create a load-bearing support structure. The rest of the body contains few supportive bones, instead having more interlinked vertebrae structures within a muscular column. This means both their spine and forelimbs are prehensile, with largely unrestricted movement, leading to their nickname amongst those of the Imperium who've encountered them as bendies. The limbs themselves end in a quadrilateral digit arrangement, with opposite fingers negating the need for an opposable thumb. There have also been suggestions that their claws carry a toxin and are connected via tubules to poison scales. While this limb arrangement is highly suited to the movement within restricted spaces often encountered in their subterranean habitat, they have been described as propelling themselves in open ground on 3 of their 4 limbs, leaving the 4th still free to operate a weapon. The Hrud tend to wrap themselves in swathes of fetid cloth, and beneath these they have outer layers of dermis that appear to be necrotic and possibly artificially induced organic matter and molds that produce toxic byproducts through bacterial decomposition. Dermal protection takes the form of large silicate scales, coated in these dense strata of decomposing materials, providing an absorptive armour of sorts, which is particularly prominent on members of their warrior caste. Little is known beyond these layers, as the dissection subject of Megastavus underwent near total internal tissue liquefaction, preventing study of the internal organs, although he was able to identify a womb-like structure, indicating the subject may have been female. It is interesting to note that in the engagement with Perturabo and his Iron Warriors, when their biological entropic fields were disrupted by his stasis device, the bodies of the Hrud did not undergo this rapid putrefaction. The physiology and adaptations of the Hrud support the notion that they evolved for a subterranean lifestyle, and they are insatiable diggers, creating expansive tubular warrens known as juntak, through the bedrock of the planets they make their homes. These glacially surfaced but uneven tunnels span for hundreds of kilometers. It is unknown how they achieve these feats, as although the Hrud do use some quite advanced technology, no evidence of excavation machinery has been uncovered. These tunnels are also seemingly impervious to the frequent tremors that beset Hrud worlds, and even those caused by munitions such as mole mortar fire. These tunnel complexes contain chambers where the Hrud store the collective knowledge of the mass tribe, in arcane chambers similar to a library of sorts, and when discovered the Hrud will fight viciously, dying in droves without thought of self-preservation, to protect their precious books. The Hrud are highly stealthy ambush fighters, and near impossible to spot behind a form of entropic field they appear to generate biologically. The effect these have on time acts like a lens to bend light around them. Stationary, they are almost invisible, and when in motion they appear to traverse space without crossing it, flickers of shadowy black in the center of a column of shimmering air like a mirage. The influence of the Hrud appears to pick at the very fabric of space-time itself, and the quickening of time around them causes an acceleration in Brownian motion of any surrounding gas particles, altering the atmospheric composition in their vicinity, and appearing not only to shift the visible light spectrum towards the violet end, but increasing the temperature substantially. These temperature spikes would often be the first warning that a Hrud attack was imminent, and despite the environmental heat bleed effect of their biology, thermal imaging is the most reliable method to target them. However, targeting the Hrud is not the only issue, as their time distortion fields cause projectiles to act unpredictably, speeding up, their explosive munition decaying prematurely, causing detonation before impact, or simply coming apart as the metal of their casing corrodes unnaturally rapidly. The effects could be unpredictable on both organic and inorganic matter, but the artifacts of the Hrud themselves appear to be unaffected. These entropic fields don't only act as defensive protection, but make engaging the Hrud at close quarters particularly dangerous, as their time-altering nature has a devastating effect. "Something's wrong," said Harakis. He peered around the edge of the archive's stack and snatched himself back, choking. His bolter fell to the ground in pieces. He held up his hands, staring at them, not believing what was happening to him. "More of them," he gasped. The bare ceramite of his gauntlets was pitting, as if left out in the elements for 5,000 years. They crumbled around his hands, exposing the flesh within. It wrinkled and sagged, muscles melting away. Fingers became knotted with degenerative disease. His skin thinned and became liver-spotted, and his veins stood out blue, the pulse in them weakening by the moment. Harakis' screams became hideous gurgles. He fell down, dust pouring from the rents opening up in his armor. Harakis' death took place in less than a second. While not too much is known of the technology of the Hrud, their most common projectile weaponry are known to be a type of plasma fusils. These fire bolts of green phasic plasma that blink in and out of existence and can materialize inside the armor of a foe, disintegrating flesh before punching out the other side. These bolts are strong enough that direct hits can penetrate even shields of breacher teams. When engaging in combat in the open, Hrud can move quickly, propelling themselves on one long arm in addition to their two legs. In their free hand they wield their plasma fusils, and they move in a pattern so their entropic fields overlay one another, providing further protection from incoming munitions. In full-scale engagements, the Hrud are also able to deploy larger versions of these fusel weapons, and they can conceal these plasma cannons, along with other machines that appear to be strange combinations of mechanical and biological, within the very fabric of space itself. In melee, in addition to claws which can deliver a variety of noxic poisons and toxins, Hrud warriors often wield blades that, when they strike, accelerate further the entropic effects of their temporal fields, causing flesh to wither to the point of desiccation in an instant. It is occasionally mistaken that the Hrud only migrate on vessels of other species, stowing away on Imperial transports and space hulks, as this is how they are commonly encountered by the servants of the Imperium when in more minor migration events. Hiding in the shadows of the crawlways or darkest neglected decks of these massive vessels, they were mischaracterized as scavengers, with some early accounts even comparing them to rodents of unusual size. However, their technological advancement certainly extends not only to having their own ships, but as we will see, far beyond this. Much like the Hrud themselves, these vessels are described as being nearly indistinct behind their shifting time fields. Solid munitions impacting these temporal wave fronts vanish in bright bursts of annihilated matter. Only las beams and nova shells, the latter detonated at close range, reliably penetrate the Hrud's esoteric shielding. Like time itself, the vessels can seem implacable, an enemy that cannot be overcome. Their own weapons take the form of temporal rays that envelop enemy ships and spirit them forward in time to the death of all things. Before we discuss the most significant engagements between the Hrud and the races of the 40k universe, can I ask if you've been enjoying this entry so far? Please consider hitting the like and subscribe buttons and the bell icon, and leaving a comment to help the video in the algorithm and for the channel to continue to grow. There have been a number of documented large-scale encounters between the Hrud and the major sentient races of the galaxy, beyond the occasional encounter with an unfortunate Imperial crewman. The threat posed to inhabited systems by Hrud migrations cannot be overstated, as we will see, and since their inception the Inquisition have remained vigilant for Hrud infestations that might threaten Imperial-controlled systems. The Hrud Rising of 980 M35 led to the Dark Angels chapter clearing 2 whole sectors. There have been notable engagements with the Soul Drinkers on Mortekan's world, and with the Ultramarines in the Battle of Orteka 9, while in 101 M40, the Star Phantoms chapter were forced to defend their homeworld Hakonath, first successfully from an Orc freebooter clan driven before the migrating Xenos, and then from the Hrud themselves, in what would prove to be a losing cause, with devastating impact on their planet. The Star Phantoms were eventually forced to abandon their homeworld and evacuate their remaining forces before the chapter was wiped out. Outside of these conflicts with Astartes, in 1783 M41, an infestation on the agri-world of Ursula Spinal led to the deployment of 6 regiments of Valhallan Ice Warriors, in which fully half the Guard forces were rendered unfit for further duty due to the entropic effects of the invading Xenos aging their troops. A similar fate awaited the 39th Cadian Xenobane Regiment when deployed against them in the Sinkar Hrud infestation of 844 M41, and even the great defender of Cadia, Commander Ursaka E. Creed, had his abilities sorely tested battling a Hrud migration between 938 and 985 in M41. The Imperium are not alone in suffering the effects of the Hrud infestation and migration events. The Tau are known to have encountered them on numerous occasions during the expansion of their empire, and the craft world of Siam Han was only saved from certain destruction in part due to the intervention of Farseer Eldrad Ulthran. However, it is from the first major known engagement between the Imperium of Man, specifically the 4th Legion Iron Warriors, led by their Primarch Perturabo, where we find the true horror of being in the path of a full-scale Hrud migration event. Occurring during the Great Crusade in approximately 999 M30, while bringing the sector into compliance on the orders of the War Council, the events on the planets of Golgus and Golgan, found within the Vulpes Straits in the subsector known as the Saktara Deeps, are still some of the most detailed to exist. Orbiting a dim sun in the white dwarf phase of its life, Golgus was a planet of near-continual twilight, with a landscape of mostly grey, barren rock. However, life, as it does, found a way to survive there. Primitive lichens found purchase on the grey substrate, and organisms that seemed to have characteristics of both plant, animal, and fungi eked out a living in the subterranean caves. The 51st Expeditionary Fleet, led by the Iron Warriors, had been tasked with bringing the worlds of the Saktara Deeps into compliance. There were some who questioned the validity of the campaign, as the subsector lacked any Terran analogue planets, and although rich in minerals, the Saktara Deeps were a long way from the edge of the Imperium, making millions of similar worlds more accessible logistically. Compared to many worlds they encountered, Golgus was a relative paradise, and the Hrud warrens they discovered there were minor and easily overcome. After compliance, the Iron Warriors, as was their nature, raised fortifications to act as nexuses for further colonies and waypoints for supply fleets. Things had been progressing well until the nightly Hrud transits began. Almost certainly triggered by the Iron Warriors' presence in the sector, a migration of the time-warping Xenos started to build. Coming at night, incursions of the Hrud on the surface, first singularly near the sites of their destroyed warrens, and then in groups following the watercourses of the planet, and finally members of the soldier caste that would intrude inside the fortifications erected by the Iron Warriors. The fortress itself was not immune from the influence of the time-warping aura of the Hrud, and structures only months old would show signs of erosion and wear comparable to if they'd been constructed thousands of years prior. The Astartes manning the fortifications were far from immune to these effects themselves. Although supposedly near immortal, The legionaries died by degree, arthritic aches creeping into joints, breathing becoming more restricted and chests tighter by the day, and their hair greying and thinning. Although difficult to detect and kill, the Hrud were susceptible to the weapons of the Astartes. Although their entropic fields would rapidly accelerate the consumption of oxygen, flamers could still be deployed to ignite the stinking layers of fetid rags the Hrud cover themselves in. This would make it easier for the bolt rounds to find their mark, their violent detonations causing flexible limbs to come apart as their time-warping powers failed and their sinuous forms suddenly collapsed into hunched, curled corpses. The screams said to be emitted by the dying Hrud were said to be unnerving even to the hardened Astartes of the 4th Legion, the sound of the last moment of a dying world, or the ultimate extinction of the final star in the universe, the death scream of time itself. On the western continent of Gughan, in 99 M30, Perturabo personally led an assault on the central fortress of the Hrud burrow complex. Losses through the winding tunnels were heavy, even by the standards of the 4th Legion, and the Hrud resistance became heavier the closer they came to the citadel at the heart of the Juntak. The previously stealthy Xenos abandoned their ambush tactics and came en masse in numbers that made time meaningless and communication between the Lord of Iron's companies hopelessly disrupted. The losses suffered against the Hrud were horrific in reaching the inner citadel. All the Imperial Army penal auxiliarii were lost to old age, and the Astartes forces reduced to half the strength at the start of the operation. Typhon siege tanks and phalanxes of dreadnoughts fared little better, felled by searing stabs of focused temporal vortices and crumbling to piles of oxidized metal and thin organic gruel in moments. But the presence of Perturabo proved decisive, his expertly fashioned war gear losing none of its functionality, and their temporal fields not only failed to confound him, but he used them to speed his own movements and hasten the demise of the Xenos assailing him. Perturabo's plan was to deploy a stasis device carried on a mechanicum crawler transport deep inside the Hrud burrow. This had to occur during a full-scale engagement, while the Hrud were using their own temporal technology in the aim of nullifying the distorting effects of the Hrud themselves. Appearing to sense the danger posed by the mechanicum vehicle, the Hrud deployed their most devastating weaponry. But when even these cannons could not breach the arcane atomantic shielding of the transport, they turned them on its defenders, ripping the legionaries to shreds as parts of them were displaced in time. Iron warriors fell fused with the remains of others as they were shunted out of their own time stream by thousands of a second, and out of synchronicity with the planet's motion. The melee warriors also descended on the remaining legionaries, their twin blades causing iron warriors who were struck to twist into impossible shapes and tear apart in some cases, while in others they aged backwards, only for the vigor of youth to be replaced by agonizing death as their implants were rejected. Although the Hrud were dying in droves, it appeared the Iron Warriors would be overwhelmed when finally the device was deployed and a corrosing stasis field blanketed the battlefield, banishing the status fields of the Hrud and leaving them not only vulnerable to the incoming fire, but with their own weaponry malfunctioning to the point of uselessness. Perturabo's plan had worked perfectly, and the Hrud were massacred. Their natural advantages lost, the Hrud were revealed as feeble physical specimens. After Perturabo's victory on Gungan, the Hrud poured through the system in ever greater numbers, each passage weakening the fighting ability of the remaining Iron Warriors on the fortress world of Golgus. Implant rejection and the ravages of age became more common in the Astartes, and their machines suffered similarly from mechanical failure, while their supplies and parts decayed at the same rate of those in use. A major temporal vortex occurred in the sky prior to these migration events, and multiple minor incursions occurred regularly inside the fortress itself. In orbit, the warships of the 4th Legion were built to last, and weathered the nightly wash of entropic energies well, Although the Hrud ships could not contend with the Imperial vessels, each close-range encounter took a heavy toll on their crews, and the fleet's strength was dwindling alongside the garrison on the planet's surface. The Grand Company was reduced to 300 of the original 500 Astartes, and of the 2,000 penal auxiliary troopers embedded in their force, the vast majority had perished of old age. The rest of their fleet had been dispatched to crack Fiorina on the far side of the straits, and to Strathopole. Both had reported Hrud incursions within days of the start of the migration, and with astropathic communication falling silent, it was assumed both were lost. At first, the Hrud appearing on Golgus were few in number, but these were soon revealed to be only wayfinders, scouts for the larger migration to come. It was hypothesized that the migration fleets were using the system as the straits it guarded were a corridor through the unstable stars of the Sactrada deeps. Some speculated they targeted the fortress as they fled the region in retaliation for the cleansing of their warrens, but their migration routes then and now follow little perceivable logical pattern. No moon orbited Golgus, the stars alone providing the only illumination. However, on this night they were drowned out by the bright wheel of light that was the temporal vortex turning in the sky. Oppressive energy poured from it, sapping the strength from the legionaries. Dark patches moved over the vortex's fluid surface, the ships of the Hrud, a fleet of them, enough to waste a star system by their presence alone. Golgus shuddered with tremors, as earthquakes and stellar outbursts always accompanied the Xenos' major incursions. On the dusty wastes there appeared a shimmer of the same quality as the vortex in the sky, a silvery curtain of undulating light, through which came a horde of Hrud, so many they appeared to be more a liquid that poured itself over the plain, rather than a body of individuals. Their entropic shroud tortured the atmosphere into a frantic dance. Gases condensed out of the sky, and towards the middle the air shimmered with heat. A band of Hrud advanced before the horde, and came to the void shields of the fortress, its barely perceivable shimmer flaring brightly as the aliens encountered it, until a crackling boom preceded the shield's collapse as it burned itself out. The aliens held for a moment, then came on again in a single mass, converging in an arrowhead on a single point, trampling their comrades' bodies as the fortress guns gave voice. Munitions fell amongst the creatures, but most did not explode. Instead, their explosive decayed or their metal failed. Some went off with weak bangs or shattered into flakes of oxidation mid-flight. Where they did detonate, hundreds of Hrud died, but the Xenos was so numerous they swallowed up the bombardment like an ocean swallows cast stones. The main body of the Hrud did not come for the walls. They sank out of sight into the ground some 400 meters short of the fortress. They made no direct attack, but drained away into the ground to follow the nearby watercourse's channel in the rock. In orbit, the Hrud ships moved into attack vectors, their uncertain shapes tilting. Then, lightning stabbed across the sky as the fortress's upper void shields absorbed the energies of their exotic weaponry. Light stabbed out from the crowd of Hrud, targeting the weapons' batteries as more advanced from the shimmering curtain. These were all the soldier caste with odd, flexible-limbed walkers in the midst of their throng. Half of these bore strange bulbous cannons that sent glittering energy looping across the walls, searing off the barrels of guns, and toppling buttressing in showers of crumbling stone. Before long the gates blew outwards as Hrud warriors bypassed the defences of the eastern wall, their plasma weapons and entropic field effects decimating the legionaries even before they came into range of their deadly blades and venomous claws. In an untenable position, the Iron Warriors were forced into a full retreat, yet the Space Marines still fell as they ran, their rusted armour falling to pieces and shattering enfeebled bones. Those Iron Warriors that could fought a desperate rearguard action, their efforts hampered as time began to skip, moments from the future impinging on the present. Only the warsmith Dantioch and a tiny handful of his Astartes made it to extraction on the waiting Stormbirds, as Golgus was abandoned. Perturabo's flagship at the time was with the 125th Expeditionary Fleet, committing to the preliminary bombardment of the prime Hrud juntak on Gungan. Many Hrud ships passed through the system, most continuing on their migration through the straits, but others remained to reinforce their capital. The stasis tactic had worked well, too well. The Hrud had been provoked into flight, but they were countering as they ran. They came in swarms from the worlds of the Saktara deeps. There was no measurable communication between the Xenos worlds, nothing to indicate that they shared information at all, but shortly after the use of the temporal bomb on Gungan, the Hrud began to move en masse. Billions were passing through the Primarch's position in their route from the sector, and the Iron Warriors were being overwhelmed. First came the foray parties projected through time and space upon the tips of focused spears of temporal energy. Many of these attempted to stow away on the 125th Expeditionary Fleet's ships. The migration ships came next, weird agglomerations of plated fungal matter, so far as could be discerned through their null-time blind shields. Hundreds of these slipped through the Legion picket fleets ringing the sub-sector, but worse was to come. The Xenos had a last surprise. At first, Perturabo suspected Exterminatus had commenced without his orders, as Gungan started heaving as giant fissures broke across its tortured surface. Pillars of lava, miles high, erupted into the stratosphere to rain back down onto the planet's surface with the force of cometary impacts. The entire city was moving. Gungan trembled on its axis as the Hrud capital Warren broke free from the bedrock. Blinding veils of white light propelled its impossible mass into orbit, using the substance of the world as fuel as teardrops of lava plummeted from its underside. Word soon reached of similar events unfolding at other Hrud-dominated worlds across the deeps. The Hrud ships fell into formation with the giant juntak vessel rising up from the surface of Gungan. They rotated around the city warren, forming a hollow cube. Painfully bright arcs of light crept from their scabrous hulls and joined them to the city ship. A sickening flicker surrounded the Hrud vessels and they blinked out of existence. Where the Hrud vessels had been, space was convulsing in a massive temporal collapse. The shockwave that emanated from the Hrud's departure point travelled at only a fraction of the speed of light, but despite the lack of speed, the Iron Warrior's vessels were quickly caught in its wash. The rearmost came apart in flaming pieces, others aged 1,000,000 years in a moment, hulls visibly corroding until all that remained were crumpled, rusting hulks. The temporal wave continued onwards through the Space Marine fleet, crippling ships and aging crews to dust in seconds. The effects were unpredictable. Some ships appeared to accelerate backwards at unimaginable speed until they vanished. Others disappeared into showers of disassociated particles. Only Perturabo's skilled evasive actions saved the Iron Blood, and even this was at great cost as different parts of the ship were forcibly jumped into different frames of reference. Matter displaced seconds in time with explosive results. The effects on the Astartes and crew were similarly erratic, some aging to dust, others simply blinking out of existence. Gungan was left a shattered mess, clouds of debris trailing out into high orbit. However, the change to the planet was as nothing compared to that wrought at the heart of the system. Its sun had swollen to double the size, progressing from a small yellow star to a red giant in the matter of minutes. The ruinous campaign against the Hrud would forever poison Perturabo's relationship with the Emperor. Watching his ships die and his forces decimated as never before, as their fortresses crumbled around them, would start him on a path to turning his face from the light of his father and his designs for the future of humanity. We will end this entry with one last theory of the Hrud, this time from Magus biologist Zurin, who was assigned to the Iron Warrior's fleet during that calamitous campaign. He theorized that the Hrud migrated through time rather than space, and that they do not experience time as mortal beings do. He also speculated it might be the point in time rather than the specific location that had caused the Hrud to travel in such great numbers. But more interestingly, he had a further theory he wanted to test, that the Hrud were not in fact Xenos at all, but but instead some strain of humanity, perhaps from the far distant future, maybe even the end of time itself. A wildly speculative and perhaps far-fetched theory, but as Magus Zorin himself stated, who knows what horrors await in the long dark reaches ahead. I hope you've enjoyed our journey together, and I've earned your subscription today, and I'll see you again in the near future where there is only war.